Thank you, Professor Mark, for inviting me. I think it's a pleasure to be here to share my experience. It's always a challenge to speak after youth. They always speak such authentically that it's so difficult to speak after them. It was very touching what they were saying. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about breaking through glass doors. I've been working in development for the past 20 years, specifically on education and environmental projects. But in the last 9 years, I started working on youth empowerment projects. To give you an idea a little bit about the Middle East, in the Middle East, almost 65% of the population is under the age of 25. So if you walk in the streets of any city, and I'm sure you all know about that, there's a lot of young population. However, in the workforce, only 50% of the workforce is youth. And out of the youth workforce, only 25% are employed. So there is 25% unemployment from the youth age workforce. If you look at Jordan, a similar kind of statistic comes up. 60% of population under the age of 25. The entire workforce, which is the working age, up to 60, only 54% are youth. And then if you look at the youth work population, the unemployment rate is almost 28%. That means 1 out of 3 actually get jobs. Young people get jobs. So what is the big challenge of youth not getting jobs? First and most importantly, it robs them of their future. It robs them of their dignity. They feel that they have nothing really to do. They're useless. Much of the time, you feel youth is an opportunity. So we have a lot of young population. It's actually an opportunity. But in areas when you have such a large young population and we're not using and harnessing their energy and putting them into positive action, slowly they will move towards negative action because they're idle and there is nothing much to do. So they become destructive not only to the society but also to themselves by using substance abuse and other forms of... So basically job creation is very important for confirming dignity and for making youth become positive members of society. I myself, I'm actually an environmentalist, and the first 10 years of my life, I worked on environmental awareness programs. And I worked in villages throughout Jordan to realize that it is very difficult to convince people to conserve environment or to conserve the flora and fauna when they don't have the basics of a shelter and a home and a basic, economic foundation to which they can feel that they love their country and they love their land. It's then that I decided working on youth empowerment projects, and I realized once you give jobs, it's actually the lever to a lot of the social change you want to do. So we want to get people that love their country, love their community. You start with the basics, which is jobs, which is a human right for every young person. And that's why I moved in the last 10 years to working with young people. So what's the problem when it comes to unemployment in Jordan? Basically, the education system, the skills that the youth get when they go through the education system in our region, it does not match the skills that are needed in the private sector. And the reason is basically the private sector, because it competes with the regional market and with the global market, it moves a bit faster than the academia. So there is a skill that remains in between, and youth are unable to get jobs. Unfortunately, also, there aren't enough civic engagement projects and programs in which we can engage youth in the community, so learning becomes more contextualized. Also, learning is not linked to the needs of the private sector. And finally, much of the vocational, specifically training programs are outdated. So material that are taught sometimes are outdated. So the youth come out with skills that are not needed in the private sector. So the private sector are frustrated because they can't get qualified workforce, although they have such a vast population of youth to employ from. At the same time, young people are frustrated because they can't get the jobs because they don't have the skills. So there is like a whole gap and a mismatch. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a picture of what does Jordan's economy look like. Recently, we've been looking at, in the past 10 years actually, we've been working with our education system to work on the reform towards the knowledge economy. But our economy looks a bit like this. The size of the bubble is actually the employment. So the bigger the size, the bigger the employment in that sector. And each bubble is actually a sector, and the x-axis is actually tradability, so how much do we export from it, and the y-axis is actually skill level. And if you see, most of the jobs are being created in the lower skills. In the upper skills, whatever jobs we're creating, it's not tradable. So we really want to see ourselves, and this is part of the National Employment Strategy, we really want to see ourselves in that box there on the right, where you have much of the low skill jobs going into higher skills, so more technology, higher level skills, and then moving the high skill level towards a more tradable profession. So this is the general. If you look at also the economies, on the right is a knowledge economy where you have high skilled labor. At the left is the traditional economy where there's a lot of unskilled labor, and Jordan looks a bit like this. So we have about 24 universities, we have a lot of university graduates, and the top tier of graduates actually leave the country out migrating, and we have something called the mind drain or brain drain, as you call them. However, if you come to the bottom of the pyramid, a lot of the jobs in the bottom of the lower skilled labor is actually filled by migrant workers. So a lot of people are sitting idle. The migrant worker, usually they are higher skilled because they have done this a lot in their country. So a lot of the industries and things like garment industries, retail industry, there's a lot of qualified people that enter and take the jobs. So basically, a lot of young people are just sitting idle. So it's then, which was back in 2006, I started with an American philanthropist, actually from New York. His name is Ronald Bruder. After 9/11, decided that he wanted to help the Middle East and North Africa by donating his money, about $10 million, to set up foundations in the Arab world. He contracted the Brookings Institute, and they gave him the model of demand-driven training programs. So demand-driven training programs, and I was the founding CEO in Jordan, so we started together. And the idea was basically that we start from the private sector, see the needs of the private sector, work with their HR, and then recruit youth, train them for 4 months, and just fill the gap. Very simple. So there was this gap, we came in between the gap. So what we did is we did need assessment, working with the HR. We got employer commitments, so they committed to employ youth. Then we made tailor-made programs. The programs came either from Jordan or from the region or from the US. So we partnered also with community colleges and universities. And we did the employment and we linked youth to jobs. We worked both in the vocational sector and the university sector. However, when working with the university students, the intervention was very easy because all it needed was just small technical intervention. For example, for IT graduates, much of our graduates had Microsoft certification, while the market wanted more open source technologies such as Java and PHP. So we just did a 4-month program, everybody got jobs. And we tried to focus on females, but we had a bit of challenge, which I'll talk to you about it. So what was the value, HR value for companies? Why did companies want to work with us? First of all, it was very important for them because it reduced the time of training. So the turnover and so on, we just helped them with a training program. Also, it contributed to the CSR. So their corporate social responsibility paid for the HR, for them to also employ with them and with other people. So it looked good. They looked good because they're helping the community. At the same time, they were helping youth. We worked in 10 governorates throughout Jordan, and we worked with the poorest of the poor and the marginalized. The foundation then, the Education for Employment, is now in 6 countries. It is in Morocco, it's in Egypt, it's in Tunis, it's in Yemen, Palestine, and Jordan. So we've expanded. It's also, of course, the base, the headquarters is in Washington D.C. And they've started EFE Europe as well, so it can become a global. We are independent nonprofits, which means we're not offices, so which is nice because our need comes from local need, so nothing is like dictated from anywhere. No donor dictates nothing. We're independent, so it's local needs and local private sector championing. So the people that sustain the institution are local private sector and not money from the regions. So it all went well, but then we had a bit of a challenge when it came to women, female employment. If you look here, this is the participation of females. There is a 50% gender gap between the males and the females. The economic participation of women in the workforce in Jordan is only 15%. It's only 15%, which is actually the lowest in the entire MENA region. It's even lower than Saudi Arabia. I think now Syria is a bit lower. And it's quite strange because you see Jordan is a very liberal society, yet, okay. It has such low. However, look at the males' participation. So there's a 50% gap. If you look at the workforce, 3.5 million working age population. Out of that, 2 million are economically inactive. Inactive means they say, we don't want the job. Either they're studying or they're training or something of the sort, so they don't want the job. And then there is an unemployment of about 100,000, while you have 300 to 500,000 foreign laborers. So really, we don't have an unemployment problem if we do a proper distribution. So what happens to this 2 million? If you look at the 2 million that say, we don't want to work, out of them, there is 61% females. And from the employment strategy, these were called the stay-at-home females. So why were they staying at home? So basically, we started working with them. We trained them. We worked 757. We worked with them, but only 40% accepted the jobs. The rest all declined the jobs. And we further started talking to them. It turned out to be that there was pressure from the family for girls not to go out and work. And this is specifically in vocational jobs. And as generation went by, and as the families were headed by the male members like brothers, it became even more difficult for females to get jobs. So basically, there were all these jobs, vocational jobs, that males did not accept, but females could not take. And that's why foreign labor came out. So it's then, we tried our best. We tried our training program. We did transportation. We raised wages. I sat on policy committees to work on different variables. But the problem was there was always this constraint of the barriers that would not allow the girls to enter the workforce. And the main barrier was really subjective, which is belief barrier. The families actually believe that women, if they do not get a university degree, they should not be working because her return on investment is not high. So whatever salary she's going to get is not worth her going out. And as a result, I applied to the Brookings Institution to work on a research project. So I'm now a scholar at the Brookings Institution, working on a research project to work on how to mediate these beliefs using social media and education programs to change beliefs, hopefully in the long run. So I'm working at the Brookings now on a curriculum reform, hopefully, and seeing what are the messages in textbooks going to men and boys and girls regarding women entering the workforce, and also looking at the Ministry of Education as a workplace and role modeling leadership at the Ministry of Education. We always talk about in the developed world about glass ceilings. And the reason why I put my title as glass doors is because we not only have glass ceilings, so if you go out and start working, you're always hit with a man always taking the leadership position. We also have glass doors because we're stuck at home. So many females are stuck at home, they can't go out. So you have glass doors, you have glass ceilings, so you're stuck in this glass house. So that's why I put my start. So I'm working now, after working at EFE and working on the youth employment, we're working now on how to engage women more in the workforce, because the more women there are in the workforce, the more moderate the society becomes and more tolerant it becomes. And I think the solution to our region is to educate women. So that's my work. I hope you